All right, good afternoon. This is Keith Stelman with the National Weather Service in Atlanta. This is the Tropical Storm Debby special briefing for Monday, August 5th. We jump right into it. Advance to the next slide. The main points as of 11 a.m. This is based on the 11 a.m. advisory today. Debby still looks like will bring heavy rainfall and some wind to the central and southeast parts of Georgia today. In fact, it's ongoing now. The threats and the impacts could become significant, particularly on the rainfall side today through Tuesday, as the system slowly tracks northeastward out of Florida into southeastern Georgia today, and it's going to take its time doing that. This is going into the changes that we've made on the watches and warnings, and I have a graphic that will show that in a minute, but a tropical storm warning is in effect for Wilcox, Dodge, Telfair, Wheeler, Montgomery, and Toombs counties within our area. That was as of last night. We did add Lawrence, Treutlen, and Emanuel. Those are the changes to the warning side. We added Lawrence, Treutlen, and Emanuel. It does look like there's a little more wind on the northwest side of the storm. Once it gets into southeastern Georgia, some of the models are starting to paint a little bit more wind on that northwest side with some of the banding that wraps around. So for that reason, we added those three counties. We did, however, because the storm is moving in a little further to the east than anticipated yesterday, and the track has shifted a little bit east. We now can pull the watch down for the counties on the northwest side of the warning. So Crisp, Dooley, Pulaski, Bleckley, and Johnson counties, the watch was discontinued as of the 11 a.m. advisory. We don't expect to make any changes to that, but that doesn't mean that you won't see some rain out of this and you won't see some banding. We just don't expect you to get 39 plus mile-an-hour winds or tropical storm force winds. Doesn't mean we can't get some gusts into the 30s with some of the banding that wraps around on the backside, especially later today. But we don't expect the tropical storm force winds to get into your area, and it was pretty close. A flood watch does remain in effect for all of the same areas. We're going to take a closer look at that this afternoon, particularly the north side of the watch, to see if there's anything that needs to be trimmed. But for now, it remains in effect as of what it was this morning. So here's the latest satellite view. Let this load on your screens. You can see, for everything from clear skies across northern Georgia to the storm approaching southern Georgia and pretty much everything in between. Debby did make landfall in the Florida Big Bend. Most of the rain and the storms on the north and the eastern side, and this is typical for landfalling storms. I'll show this on the radar in a minute, that it starts to what we call dry slot on the south side and becomes more top heavy and north heavy with most of the rain featured near the center and to the north and the northeast of the center. So we can see that a little better on the radar loops. Here is the regional radar loop on the left, and the flood warnings, of course, overlaid on top of that. The dry slot that is moving into, say, north of Tampa. And then there are two. This is where we tend to get a lot of the heaviest rain, is from the center, and then where the intersection of these bands comes into the storm itself. So the area near Brunswick right now is where one of the intersections of one of these bands feeds in is, and the other one's further north up in the Savannah area. But these two types of bands and these types of features are typical. And because this thing's going to be moving pretty slowly, these bands will be set up over the same area for quite a while. So the flash flooding could become pretty significant in a very short period of time wherever these bands intersect. The graphic on the right is a zoom in from the Valdosta radar, and you can see the center of the storm, City, Florida, and it's basically drifting east-northeast at this point, and it should very slowly meander by this evening into tonight, and it may not actually reach the coastline until sometime tomorrow morning into the afternoon. That's what the Hurricane Center has. Moving on to the next slide. Here is the 11 a.m. advisory. You can see the storm. Note how slowly, here's the 8 a.m. Tuesday morning, the storm is just west of Savannah. And then we go to 8 a.m. Wednesday, it is just east of Savannah and Charleston, according to the Hurricane Center's latest forecast. And by 8 a.m. Thursday, it's maybe by Myrtle Beach. So it takes almost 2 days for it to traverse the area between, say, Savannah to maybe Myrtle Beach. And that's where the forecast really starts to get tricky. But there is fairly high confidence through at least tomorrow morning that this is about where it'll be, especially anywhere in the Cone region, from Savannah, maybe just north of there, but or even just south of there. Beyond that, there still is some uncertainty, and I will dive into that in a minute. Let's see. Keep in mind that we show this as part of the cone, that there will be impacts well outside the cone, both north and south of the cone. We do have bands that are going to be wrapping in, and so just because you're not inside the cone doesn't mean that you won't have impacts. That's always a reminder we like to put up with these graphics. All right, so tropical storm warnings and flood watches. The graphic on the left is the warnings. There are no more watches in the area, and you can see from Swainsboro to Dublin, and then south to into Tallahassee's area, we have the warnings. It starts with Wheeler and all the way over to the counties I mentioned. Again, we don't anticipate too many changes with this unless we see some changes in the wind field or the wind structure or a change in the track. But with it taking a more easterly trajectory, at least at this point, we're not expecting much change with that. The flood watches remain unchanged for now, which goes all the way to Warrenton and then back to the west of the tropical storm watch area, including Cordele and Crisp County in the flood watch. We do expect the rainfall, again, to be a pretty sharp cutoff between west and east. So everything from Macon to Vidalia, there's going to be a really sharp gradient of rainfall. So the folks on the western edge of the flood watch, there's a chance that we don't verify the flood watch per se, but you're close enough to the heavy rainfall gradient that we had to include you in the watch overall. So just keep that in mind, that the confidence with this watch increases the further south and the east you go. And if you're on the western edge, it's one of those 50-50 things where you could see some banding to create some heavy rain, but the gradient is going to be a pretty sharp gradient. The Weather Prediction Center, they don't typically issue a high risk, but they have in this particular case. That is that both for day 1 and day 2, because of the slow moving nature of Debby. You can see on the left, we have the high risk region just to the south and the east of Dublin. So basically everything in the moderate risk area, everything in red is what we included in the flood watch. But you can see that there is a risk, does decrease as you go further northwest, even including the Macon area. And by the time you get to the Atlanta metro, there's at least no risk for now from the storm. As we go into day 2, the shift really starts to focus up the coast, and then in the extreme east portion of our area, including down in the Vidalia region, and then east towards the coast, and then up into South Carolina as the storm reaches the coast. And a lot of those feeder bands are on the northern side, which would impact a larger portion of South Carolina. And that's for the day 2. Again, here's just a zoom in and a brief look at both of those things all together to show you some more of a complete picture of the 3 things related to the flood watch. Now, when we talk about how it impacts the rain and the river floods, this is the latest from the River Forecast Center and their ensemble prediction system. A lot of the points you see here are outside of our county warning area, and they fall into the Charleston and or Jacksonville region in terms of major or moderate flood based on the QPF forecast. So if you have any specific questions on the rivers in those areas, I would have to direct you to both the Charleston and the Jacksonville offices if you have questions. But it does look like a pretty significant flood event is going to occur should those precip values pan out across southeast Georgia in the next 48 hours, 72 hours or so. Here is a look at that rainfall. This is the storm total rainfall through Friday morning based on the latest forecast. And our area, which includes down in Toombs County, you guys are right on the 10 to 15 threshold, and that is the area in purple, 10 to 15 inches. That includes down all the way down to Waycross, and this is a statewide graphic. Again, our area cuts off that we're responsible for down in Crisp County all the way over to Toombs County. It's when you get down along the coastal region that the 15 plus, and we've seen amounts vary, and those amounts are going to vary pretty significantly between 15, 20, whatever. It just depends on where some of those bands set up and or how slowly the storm actually tracks off to the east-northeast. But regardless, we're looking at a pretty significant flood event across southeast Georgia. Anywhere greater than where you see 8 inches plus, we'll see also some flooding in the 4 to 6 range, particularly if it comes in a short period of time. But the real focus is going to be across southeast Georgia, where a pretty significant flood event can set up. The other thing I want you to note is that the tight gradient. I did highlight that here. We have 1.5 inches in Macon, and we have 10 to 15 in Vidalia. So somewhere in there, and it may be even a tighter gradient than this, where the 1.5 inches could be a little further east or even a little further west. But we go from 1.5 inches to 10 to 15 inches pretty quickly from west to east. And so that'll be something to pay attention to on where that gradient actually sets up. All right, the winds. Winds are going to be the secondary threat with this system outside the rainfall. The strongest winds obviously will be across eastern and central Georgia. This is based on the current grids we have, the max wind gusts that are in the forecast from all the offices. We sort of mosaiced it together. The timing of the strongest winds looks like this afternoon coming into southern Georgia, into tonight, and through early tomorrow afternoon. In terms of timing, probably earlier on the northern edge where you see this 30 to 40 up towards Macon. Again, that's below tropical storm thresholds, 30 to 40. It's more in the wind advisory type threshold. That's probably going to be today when the storm is the strongest as it's going through the weakening phase. And especially if we can get any bands to form on the northern edge of the precip shield that we see across South Georgia now. There will be some stronger gusts possible within those bands. However, I do want to point this out. Because it is slow moving, the duration of these wind gusts will elevate the risk for downed trees and power lines, particularly in the tropical storm warning area and areas to the south and the east. So your winds will stay gusty for at least 24 hours. And as a result, even though we don't maybe have, constant 40 to, 30 to 40 mile an hour wind gusts, over the period of 24 hours with the rain coming in, we could see a risk for downed trees and power lines as a result. One thing to note that you see this higher value back to the west from Albany to McRae up towards Dublin on the 40 to 50. One thing that's starting to stand out in the models is the center of the system is moving basically, let me get my pen so I can draw on here so you can see. The center of the system is moving like through here according to the hurricane center. So as it's moving in through here, where some of the models are trying to wrap in on the backside some stronger winds. And so as a result, we're getting a little stronger winds on the northwest side of the system, maybe more than usual. And so we'll have to keep an eye on that. And that's what's showing up. That's why this is showing up in here, because we're populating with some of the guidance that's given us a little stronger winds on the northwest side of the system. So that's why the 40 and the 50 creep up into here in the southeast portion of our area. Let's see. Go on to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about the uncertainty going forward. This is a look at all of the models in the ensemble. So this isn't the official forecast. This is all of the guidance that we look at. You guys typically see it as spaghetti plots. Everybody shows them all the time, but it's going to give us the best look at the uncertainty down the road with this system, because all of the steering flow really breaks down in the next day or so, which is why this system really slows down as it's heading east-northeast. So the models do initialize it fairly well across northeast Florida in the Florida Big Bend. Going forward, you can see every little dot represents a computer model run, and the tracks by color determine are some of the major model runs, and then in that are all the ensembles. The red indicates a high confidence that the storm will be somewhere in that circle. So it's kind of like the cone you see from the Hurricane Center. So we start to see a little bit of spread. Notice we have storm, some models predicting all the way to Jacksonville, some have it up in southern Georgia. And it's these little differences. And when you see people posting individual model runs that show it going one direction and some showing it going different, it's because at this point, when you initialize the storm or put the storm in one spot, it has a different outcome down the road. It's kind of like disturbing putting a leaf in the stream and seeing what happens down the road. So we'll go a little bit forward in time, and this is getting to midday Tuesday. We're starting to see a little bit of spread in the models, with some all the way up near Savannah, maybe, and that's closer to the Hurricane Center forecast, near Charleston, and then some further south. And so it's about this point when we start to really lose a lot of the steering for it. And that's why the Hurricane Center, you'll notice from Tuesday through Wednesday into Thursday, has a very slow forward speed, or very what we call almost a stall somewhere off the southeast coast. And it's because those steering currents break down. So the spread really becomes noticeable beyond this point, midday Tuesday. And so when I go forward to here, this is by late Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. You'll notice there's a camp of models that start to run it up the coast, and there's some that try to take it more east-southeast. And this has a big role to play down the road, say later in the week, and what happens with this. Because when I go forward and I jump this next slide, this is, you notice we're pretty compact all the way to Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. Now I go forward, and this is Thursday afternoon. We see a pretty big spread of more in line with what the Hurricane Center's thinking, up and bending it back into the South Carolina coast, or further north and east up in North Carolina, or some of them keeping it down off the Georgia coast, or even backing it back up into Georgia. There is a camp of models that do that. It is a lower probability, but we want to throw that out there that it's not off the table just yet, because of the fact that the storm meanders off the southeast coast. So we still have to keep an eye on it even after it gets offshore, until we know for sure that it's going to make this northerly track into South Carolina or even North Carolina, that we really can take Georgia off the hook. So something to keep in mind going forward, and that's why we're going to continue the briefings, because we're not done with it per se until we know for sure that it is going to make that turn. But for now, the official forecast is for it to do so. But we have to get there first, and we have to make sure that the model trends are in that direction. So threat levels as of 11 a.m. Monday. Obviously, the wind gusts on a lower threshold, 20 to 45 mile an hour wind gusts across much of the area. Limited to maybe elevated. Again, the duration is what's going to get you in the southeast. Flooding rain and the river flooding, pretty significant impacts, even within our area across the extreme south and east counties. Tornadoes, more of a limited threat. I do have one slide on that I want to touch on the next coming up. But from the tropical storm probabilities, we like to show this just to give you an idea of the chances. So Vidalia, tropical storm winds 40 mile an hour greater, 3 in 10 chance. Augusta, 1 in 10. Savannah, 5 in 10. So it gives you an idea of the probabilities based on all of the model guidance for tropical storm force winds. And you can see the biggest threat is going to be in southeast Georgia. So, oops, what happened to my tornado outlook? I had it here. I need to update this with the tornado risk, but it's the SPC slight risk area, which basically only touches, I'll just touch this, it only touches really Toombs County. And it's early on in this period that we have the risk. Most of the greatest risk is south and east Georgia, outside of our county warning area, which would be down to Savannah, down to Waycross. That region will have the greatest tornado risk through the day today primarily, and then maybe lingering into tonight. So, summary, key takeaways. Again, heavy rain, wind, parts of south and southeast Georgia. That threat is going to be significant for a portion of our area, but for a big chunk of southeast Georgia in Charleston's area and in Jacksonville's area with the slow-moving nature of Debby. I mentioned the changes to the warning areas, and I mentioned the drop in the tropical storm watch. And then again, we're going to evaluate the flood watch through today with updated rainfall totals and updated track as the track gets updated. So keep an eye out for changes to the flood watch through the day today as we evaluate new QPF and rainfall potential as it comes in. So with that, these are the ways you can reach out to us. We will have another briefing tomorrow, but if you have any specific questions for your area, I can either take them now, or you can reach out to us by phone, email, or on Slack, because we are in Slack answering questions. So with that, I will stop the recording.